I stopped everything I could do. I didn't know what to take away from it. I was just completely numb. Keys already were in the ignition, it was running, and she slammed into a side of a wall and drafted it around the curb. He was panicking, so he bit the front of his tongue, and blood is flying everywhere. It's coming onto my face. I'm thinking, how the hell am I gonna get this guy out of here? Like, this guy is going to die right here, right now in my arms, and there's nothing I can really do about it. And it was this eerie feeling of like, this is it. I made a film about a conversation that I had with a man by the name of Dima, whose life had been torn apart by war. I get asked all the time why I abruptly left my life behind in America to come to Ukraine, and I've always had a difficult time telling the whole story. Not because I've been trying to hide anything, but rather it's just never been an easy one for me to tell. However, now I feel that I need to show you what I believe are the divine nature of the things that happened to me leading up to the making of the film. Things that were so strong and so powerful to me that it made me willing to drop everything I had to come to Ukraine. Things that, if told, I believe will add an extra layer of meaning and emotion to an already powerful story delivered by Dima. So, here we go.
Cerro Gallina, Santa Cruz, Galápagos con Nicolás, presente, en vivo, let's go, look the bread.
Before the war in Ukraine broke out, I was an entrepreneur. I was selling anti-snoring chin straps on Amazon. And on paper, my life looked pretty good. I was only working maybe 2-3 hours a week. I was traveling, I was learning Spanish, I was enjoying that a little bit of financial freedom, the kind of stuff that they preach on YouTube, you know? I was living that kind of life.
Estoy loco. Titanic.
But even though it all looked good on paper, I was still very much lost as a person. For several months leading up to February of 2022, I was diving deep into my past, seeing how it had affected me in the present, and finding out why I was so discontent with who I was. And through that work, I started to feel this weight being lifted off my shoulders and started feeling like I could be my true self. And that was a wonderful feeling to have. But I wanted to take it a step further. During this process, I had a friend who told me about his experiences with ayahuasca, this plant medicine that you take in the middle of the Amazon jungle. He told me stories about how it was the most powerful thing he ever experienced and how it revealed so many things about his past and really helped him heal. And I thought, hey, since I'm doing this stuff already, why not add a little extra kick with this ayahuasca thing? And I had heard from him and a bunch of other people, and I said, you know what, let's give it a go. And in mid-February of 2022, I booked a flight to Peru to attend a 12-day ayahuasca retreat. Receiving that form of healing was arguably one of the most powerful experiences of my life. Just taking in these experiences, sometimes merciless and brutal, at other times beautiful and captivating. Just words just can't describe it. And I had taken this medicine, I believe it was 6 times over the 12-day retreat, each time revealing something new and presenting insights and revelations into my life. But there was one experience and one night in particular that struck me the most. I remember it just being really bright. There was this white and green light just surrounding me, and I can remember hearing this voice talking about a world full of darkness. And the only way that darkness can be pushed away is if light is brought to it. And this voice was telling me, like, it's your job to bring light to the world. And all of a sudden I felt this large black figure like standing over the side of my left shoulder as if there was someone physically there, and you could feel its presence. It was almost like this 8-foot tall figure. And then the voice told me, saying, it was like, I will be with you through your entire journey, your entire way. And then after that, everything just faded into white. And I remember taking away from that experience, like, that's it. That's my job. When I leave this jungle, it's going to be my responsibility to bring light to the world, however that may be. On March 1st, after the 12-day retreat was over, I left the jungle and headed back to the nearby city of Iquitos to my hotel. Now, during those 12 days, my phone didn't have any service. I'm in the middle of the Amazon jungle. Of course, I couldn't check it at all. Didn't want to anyway. However, when I checked it, when I first got service on that day, I just remember notifications and text messages bombarding through the phone. And I started reading all of them, and it said, well, I was like, oh my God, Russia invaded Ukraine. I didn't believe it was going to happen. For months leading up to the conflict, I was following it very closely. I'd always been interested in world affairs, and it was shocking. But at the same time, I also realized that while it was tragic, I didn't think at the time I could really do anything about it. I mean, you know, being an American, there's always conflicts involving around the world, like Afghanistan, Iraq, or whatever. And I was like, it's tragic what's going on over there, but it's very far away, and there's nothing I could really do. So I just went about living my normal life and headed back to Austin, Texas, where, like many white dudes, fresh off of an ayahuasca retreat, I made plans to become a life coach. A life coach.
Do you space the out all the time? If a great white shark is coming full steam ahead at your ass, tell the out! How do you react when a fly lands on you? Listen to your soul. You might start feeling real goddamn important. I'm going to sign off. You know what's crazy to me about the society?
This was my idea of bringing light to the world. I had this weight that was lifted off my shoulders the past several months through these techniques and frameworks that I applied to really diving deep into my own past. And I felt maybe I could teach to other people. I sold my business, my Chinstrap business, back in May of 2022 to finance the whole thing. I was all in. Every day I was shooting and editing videos. I turned my bedroom into a studio. I was buying lighting and camera equipment. And initially it was very fun. I really did enjoy it. But as time went on, I started to feel like this path wasn't the one I was supposed to be going down. I was becoming more easily distracted. I was not engaged with what I was doing. It felt like I was experiencing this fatigue that I didn't know where it was coming from. And I think it was just overall, I was getting tired of the idea itself. And right around this time was when I started to think about, hey, what if I did go to Ukraine? These conversations with roommates, I'd be talking about, hey, like, what if I did do this? Like, what do you think about it? And at the same time, I noticed I was checking news reports and updates from the conflict more so than actually working on the life coaching idea itself. The interest was there, and a part of my gut was leaning towards that way. But then at the same time, I was thinking, this is just a natural part of building a new business. This is just this Ukraine thing is just a distraction. It's leading you away. Like, this is just not what you're supposed to be doing. It just doesn't make sense. Ukraine is a distraction. So I ignored all of it. Continued to press on, ignoring the gut feeling, putting out video after video after video. Until one day, it all came to a full stop. On the morning of July 1st, I was drafting some emails when I received a knock on my door. And I could hear this voice on the other end of the door. And I thought, it's probably just some solicitor. It's the middle of the day. What are people doing knocking on the door? And I go up to the peephole and I see this woman on the other end of the door. And I start asking, she looked homeless. So I was like, hey, what do you want? She's like, please open the door. And I'm like, okay. And when I opened the door, I could see that she had her hands zip tied behind her back. And she was saying, help, help, help. Like 3 guys had tried to rape me. I need you to untie me right now. And I quickly darted back into the house and grabbed a pair of scissors and came back out and started to help cut her loose, so to speak. And in that moment, you could see that she had like bruises like here and there. And as I'm cutting this, it was so close. The zip ties were so tight on the skin, like I was afraid I was going to cut hers during this whole experience. And when I think back on it, I just remember the silence. It wasn't loud, it was quiet, shaking. And she was shaking, and I was just completely shook by the whole experience. I eventually cut him off and gave her a hug and asked her if there was anything else that I could do for her, and she said no. And in that moment, voluntarily, she just walked off. Went right down the steps of my front porch onto the street. And in that moment, I was confused. It was like this woman had just experienced rape. Like, why would, or had attempted rape, and like, why would she go about doing that? Like, what? It didn't make sense to me. Thankfully, the police were already looking for her, and she only made it about 20 feet before a patrol car pulled up and was able to take her in. But after that experience, I stopped everything I could do. I didn't know what to take away from it. I was just completely numb for days on end. The police told me the story that she had been trying to escape. She got into a vehicle that was already, had the keys already were in the ignition, it was running, and she slammed into a side of a wall and drafted it around the curb, and she had been going from door to door asking for help, and nobody gave it to her. She went to 4 different houses before she made it to mine, and I just started asking myself, why me? Obviously, my pain was secondary to what she incurred, but I couldn't help asking, of all the houses in Austin, she came to mind. And the pain from the experience, at least on my end, was so strong enough, I had to find a way to be able to put meaning to it. Otherwise, I would just go crazy because I was just numb every day. I didn't know what to do. And all I remember thinking to myself over and over is like, she came there for a reason. She came there for a reason. And I remember just going into this state of reflection of why? Of all the doors, why did she come to mind? And I remember sitting there in silence, not reviewing any sort of sheet telling me what I should do or pros and cons list. I just remember sitting there on my porch thinking, Ukraine, Ukraine, Ukraine. And it was this eerie feeling of like, this is it. Ever since I was a young kid, I had always been captivated by war, by conflict. It was always the good guy versus bad guy thing was always fascinating to me. And having already been interested in learning the Russian language and hadn't already taken lessons up at that point, having studied Soviet war history and their involvement in the Second World War and in university, it kind of all came together. And I thought, hey, like, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is why she came. She wanted to push me in that direction, and everything else in my life wasn't pushing me hard enough. And maybe that's why God or the universe or whoever sent her there. But there was one thing that kept holding me back, and that was death. You know, at the time, it's Ukraine. People die in Ukraine all the time. It's a country at war. If I had gone there and I had died, it would be no surprise to anybody. And this fixation on death made me very hesitant on going. Everything else seemed to line up. Everything else seemed to make sense to me. My gut was telling me to go. But this hesitation of potentially dying got in the way. However, that hesitation didn't last very long. On July 17th, I made plans to go paddleboarding with a friend of mine. It was a beautiful day, typical Texas summer heat. Water was real cool, birds flying, the sun was awesome. And I started telling him about what I was thinking about doing. I was like, hey, I'm thinking about going to Ukraine. And he looked at me and he said, Ukraine? I said, yeah. He was like, you mean war-torn Ukraine? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, hey man, you know you could die doing that, right? And of course I had been thinking about that over the past 2 weeks, but in my mind, in that moment, I managed to justify it by saying, like, I told him, hey, we could die anywhere, anytime. And he looked at me like, you know what, you're probably right. And we continue going on, paddleboarding around the lake, and about 20 minutes, only 20 minutes after we had that conversation, he falls off his paddleboard and starts to drown. For some reason that day he had decided to wear these military boots as he was on the paddleboard, so the water had gotten into the boots and made him much more susceptible to sinking. So he was struggling to stay afloat. And I dove in immediately, going after him, and managed to pick him up from under his waist. And he was in full panic mode. It's just everything was fleeing, water was in my face, I was getting hit in the head, trying to get everything under control. I managed to get my arm on top of this paddleboard and having the other arm having him here. But it only continued to get worse. He was panicking, so he bit the front of his tongue, and blood is flying everywhere. It's coming onto my face, and the weight that he was putting his shoulder on the board, trying to sustain himself and trying to hold himself on the board, caused his shoulder to dislocate. So now this guy's spitting blood. His right shoulder is completely dislocated. And we're in the middle of this lake. And I'm thinking, how the hell am I going to get this guy out of here? Like, this guy is going to die right here, right now in my arms, and there's nothing I can really do about it. So I'm desperate, moving around, and I just looked at two people off in the distance, or a group of people, and I was like, hey, you guys need to get the F over here right now. And a bunch of these people come over in these different boards, and I'm still holding on to them. I'm like using my legs to tread water as much as I can. It's full adrenaline at this point. They managed to come into the water. Another guy grabs him up from under the butt and pushes him onto the board. And we eventually managed to get him all the way to the shore, and the fire department was already waiting there when I got there. And managed to get him into an ambulance and started heading him down towards the ER. I eventually arrived at the hospital where he was put into care, and I talked with the doctor, and the doctor says he's stable. And eventually head over to his room. The doctor pops his shoulder back in and gives him painkillers. And of course, painkillers put him to sleep for a little bit, so during those few hours when he was asleep, I started to reflect on what had just happened. And in that reflection, I remember thinking about the first thought that I had when I had jumped into that water, which was, God, what the hell do you want? The timing of this incident being only 2 weeks separated from the woman showing up to my door was absurd. I mean, here we were in Austin on a clear summer day, and everything seemed like it was going perfect. It was peaceful, and sure enough, my friend was this close from dying. And only 20 minutes after the conversation that I had with him regarding the potential of dying at anywhere, anytime. And here it was. No mortars, no bombs, no artillery, no active war zones. Austin, Texas, beautiful Austin, Texas. And death was at my friend's door, almost at my door. If he had hit me a little bit harder in the face with the elbow, I could have been knocked out and sunk to the bottom. Gone. And I remember heading over to the waiting room and seeing families with their hands together, praying likely for the life of one of their relatives, and hearing the radios of the nurses going off about how they're bringing somebody in who was just in a head-on collision. And thinking at that moment, like, death could come from me, could come from anybody, anywhere, anytime. Didn't matter where I was, Ukraine or beautiful Austin. Eventually, my friend wakes up, doctor clears him to leave the hospital, and we start heading out the hospital. And I remember the moment we walked out those doors of that hospital that I was going to Ukraine. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And 3 days later, I booked the flight.
In 2 weeks, I'm gonna go to Poland and then on to Ukraine. I wanna document the war. I wanna bring a voice to people that can't leave. They don't have the money to leave. They're stuck, they're surrounded, feel trapped. Give them a voice. Show people what's going on. I personally feel that the reality of war and human suffering isn't portrayed in a way that speaks to someone's soul through modern ways of media, through mainstream media, through the big networks. I want to do it in a way that speaks to people, makes you feel it, makes you really understand what it's like to be there. I want to see it myself and show it to you. A camera is merely just an eye that takes you other places, takes you to other worlds. And I want to be able to use it to connect, show people what it's really like. I feel it's important. Sure, it's risky, absolutely. But I feel it's what I want to do.
My first month or so in Ukraine, I spent most of my time just experiencing what it was like to be there, both the good and the bad.
И по сусекам, как говорили в сказке, по сусекам поскребла, кашки.
On one hand, I met a lot of awesome people, exchanged languages, shared laughs, learned each other's stories, played games, you name it. Memories that I'll cherish forever. On the other hand, I remember why I needed to go there in the first place, and made sure to explore the darker sides of Ukraine as well. The devastation couldn't have been more clear. You could see apartment buildings that were completely split in half, with bullet holes in the sides of these structures, and just houses with their roofs caved in. It was jarring. But to me, the thing that was the most jarring were the looks on people's faces when they told their stories and their experiences on the war, or the way they shrugged and their eyes would shrink, the whole thing, it just, to me, that spoke volumes of the effect that the war not only had on the country physically, but mentally. And I made it a point that I wanted to tell stories of people that were severely mentally affected by it, that had these kinds of experiences, and for them to share their truths. But the issue I had initially was being in Kyiv. I was kind of far from it all. I didn't really run into anybody that I felt had a story that was the one. So I started devising plans to head east. There's this Ukrainian city by the name of Poltava. At the time, it was only a few hundred kilometers from the front lines, so I thought maybe there'll be refugees or people that had experienced these horrible traumatic events. So I booked a train ticket. And the morning that train to Poltava was supposed to leave, a random song just started playing on my phone when I woke up. I didn't touch the phone, I didn't open Spotify or anything, it just started playing. And it was this country song, Odessa, by Charlie Crockett.
I've got Odessa on my mind.
And at the time, I remember looking at it and seeing the Spotify app open up on my phone and thinking, this is another one of those coincidences, I'm telling you. And sure enough, there's this city by the name of Odessa in Ukraine as well. Obviously in the song, he's talking about Odessa, Texas. But knowing that there was a city in Ukraine with the same name, I thought, this is a weird coincidence, this is a weird thing. You know what? I've already had some absurd things happen to me in the past couple months. Screw it. I'm gonna head over to Odessa. So I canceled out my train to Poltava and booked a one-way to Odessa the same day. Initially, my time in Odessa was the same as it was spent in Kyiv, just taking the time to make friends and have conversations and learn about their experiences. But like Kyiv, I still struggled to find that one story that I felt that needed to be told. However, one afternoon, that all changed. I remember it was the morning of October 7th. A guy in the hostel who was a volunteer, and he was looking for someone to film what he was doing. At the time, he was helping supply car batteries to power artillery pieces. So I said, hey, you know what, I'll go film you. So that morning I went out and filmed his job and what he was doing. When I got back to the hostel, I immediately just went in and started editing it and started putting together the clips, and that took me hours, of course. And that afternoon, I remember this couple walking in to the hostel, carrying a bunch of plastic bags and you name it. And the husband walks over to me and he notices this press pass that I was wearing. It was a press pass that a Ukrainian friend of mine who worked in Ukrainian media helped me obtain. And he says, hey, are you a journalist? And I said, yeah, journalist. And he's like, oh, I used to be a journalist. I was a camera operator. I'm like, oh, really? Where? And he said, Mariupol. At the time, I had only heard stories about Mariupol and the awful things that had happened there, but I never really knew much about it in detail at the time. But definitely the rumors and the stories were ringing true in my head at the time, so it did ring a bell. And I was like, oh, were you there at the beginning of the invasion? And there was this pause after I asked that question, that I could see in his face that he was struggling to get the words out. And that pause, that single pause, was the very moment I knew this was it. I don't know why, I don't know what made me think that, but that pause was it. And so I asked him, I was like, would you be comfortable sharing your story on camera? And he said, yeah, let's do it. And this man was Dima.
testing, one, two,
sometimes
three.
maybe good, sometimes maybe shit. Rod.
Да, любимый.
Ну,
Я
так.
могу делать это в лаптоп тоже. So да, it could be like
Ну,
что-то
сейчас,
это, да.
сейчас нормально. Я говорю, сейчас нормально, потому что белый день, солнце светит, а вечером будет плоховато с картинкой.
About a week later, we got the translations completely done on the conversations, and
Да, конечно.
in the moment I read that first transcription was the moment I was able to fully comprehend all of the details that he revealed in those conversations, and I was blown away to see him go through event after event after event. You could tell it was wearing on him. You could see the emotion in his face and the emotion in his body language, and it was very difficult for him, let alone anyone, to do in a therapist's office. And here he is doing this on camera in a very vulnerable position to talk about these experiences on camera for the world to see. And it just became very apparent to me that he gave that interview everything he had. And that now I had the obligation to do everything I could. For the next 7 months, I did everything I could to make sure that his story was told, to make sure that he didn't have to live with it in silence, to bring light to this issue I really think matters, and to make sure that this account was shown to you, this experience. No political agendas, no calls for arms or for justice, just Dima and his story. However you end up choosing to interpret this film, this account, this experience, is totally up to you. But all I ask is that you take away from this film, whatever you take away from it, that you at least feel some sort of compassion for Dima and for anybody whose life has been torn apart by this war. Nothing more, nothing less. Thank you.
Yeah, это все.
Життя продовжується.
Да. Молодец, продал все. Да.
Так, тут посмотри.
Спасибо.
Записала фильм.
Да.